the very first time you meet these characters, right, he's setting up who these characters are in just the phrase "Good morning."
Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Well, what a week that we missed from the podcast. We're sorry, everybody. Life got in the way, and Michael and I just couldn't find a moment to get together and go over the first chapter of this podcast, of the book. The second episode. Boy, am I going to get this right? Is it
episode 2, chapter 1?
Thank you. There we go. See, this is why I need Michael. This is why I never do anything without him anymore.
Not true. I love your short videos that you do.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I know. I need to get. It's been a crazy busy week, and so I haven't been able to do as much as we wanted to. But we did find time to get together and discuss the first chapter of The Hobbit. And we're not going to get through the whole thing. I think we're going to stop, guys. We're going to end at the point when Frodo dives back into his Hobbit hole and says his last good morning to Gandalf. Because there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of interesting things, and there's a different perspective in this story than there is in doing the Silmarillion, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yep. For all of you folks that are really impatient, we are going to take our time with this. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I love The Hobbit. Just started rereading it to my kids. I do it on a cycle, Lord of the Rings, then The Hobbit, and because of the ridiculous number of children I have, it ends up being a 3 or 4 year cycle, and then I start over. So but this will be my final cycle because my youngest is just about to turn 7, so she is getting to hear The Hobbit for the first time, and then Lord of the Rings after that. And who knows? By that time, the next 4 years comes around, I might have grandchildren, but we'll see.
Whoa!
So I got. Oh, my daughter got engaged, so that's.
Oh, congratulations! Wow!
And there might be 1 or 2 more engagements in the next 12 months. We'll see.
Yeah, and for those of you just listening in, Michael has 9 children.
Yeah,
8 right now, but yeah, that's a lot.
You know what?
You're doubling me up, which is kind of crazy.
Elon Musk has no criticism for me.
That's right. And so as we jump into this, we will have an extended podcast, which you can get, of course, by going to theonering.com/member. We're going to talk about a couple questions from Mandy and Billiam from our Discord chat. So if you want to join our full Discord chat, go to theonering.com/member. It's $4 a month. The first month is free. Or you can go to theonering.com/Patreon. I believe. Just go to theonering.com/member and click on the Patreon link. That'll work. I don't remember these things. And you can become a member there for $5 a month, and the first week is free because of limitations of Patreon and how much money they take. So join us there. You'll get our extended podcast. We're going to talk a little bit also about what's in this interesting book, the annotated Hobbit, right there.
Nice.
And some of the notes in there, because it's kind of like, so I was telling Michael, it's kind of like the study Bible for the Hobbit. And so if you're going through this with us slowly, it's probably something good to have. And so I'll provide some links below on Amazon. I got mine on eBay for $9. That's a pretty good deal for a hardcover. And
it brings in, and so that it's going to bring in connected passages and other letters from Tolkien and things that he wrote that connect with
and how the changes from the 1937 to the 1966 edition are executed and where they are. And so it's an interesting read. So if you're reading through it slowly, I recommend it. I read the whole chapter of The Hobbit without reading anything else. And then I went through this annotated Hobbit, and then I also have my history of the Hobbit book that I'm looking at. So if you want to get those details, which we're going to talk about in our extended podcast, go to theonering.com/member, become a member. And every week, as long as life doesn't get in the way, but every week is our goal, guys, we will have an extended edition of The Hobbit that you'll be able to listen to. And you can become part of our Discord chat if you go to click the freeloaders link below for Discord, and you can get invited to the smaller
we love our freeloaders.
We do.
And we love our members more.
So you can be bought, Michael, is what you're saying.
Can be bought. That's right. So just in case it wasn't clear, we are going to be going primarily through the 1966 version of The Hobbit.
Yeah.
We will refer to the 1937 occasionally and the abortive rewrite that happened as well. But 1966 version is the primary.
that leaves us with a lot of unique Hobbit facts, which I'm going to try and start every episode with an interesting Hobbit fact that you might not know if you're reading through this for the first time in the kind of detail that we're going to be reading through it.
I'm going to be surprised by these.
Are you? I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so here's the first Hobbit fact that I've got for you this time around. Originally, Thorin's name, do you know what Thorin's name originally was in the first manuscript?
I heard it once, but can't remember.
Oh, no, you've heard it many times. Thorin's original name was Gandalf.
Gandalf. Oh, right.
Gandalf's original name was Bladorthin. Bladorthin. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, people, but Bladorthin, one of those two.
I've heard Bladorthin, so.
Yeah, okay. That was my first guess. All right, and then Smaug's original name was Prifton. And so we have these are just the original things, and they're very much out of the prose Edda, the Snorri Snorrison,
Icelandic epic.
Yeah, 5th century epic, where all these names came from originally. And so Gandalf was a dwarven name that Tolkien then took and decided Bladorthin was not a great name for a wizard and changed it. Same thing with Smaug. So interesting. Like, these names did change. Probably a good choice, but maybe that's just because we're so used to it. I don't know.
I have no opinion on that because, as you mentioned, I've been marinating in the names of Middle Earth for literally almost my whole life, for 40 years, and so I don't have an objective opinion about that.
Comfort might dictate our reaction to these names, and we would have thought maybe Bladorthin. Of course, his name is Bladorthin. It's got to be. All right, guys. So we're going to get into the Hobbit.
By the way, does your version start with a front page on the runes, the dwarven runes?
Boy, which version are we talking about?
Whatever the main version you're reading, not the.
The main version is right now is a Kindle version that I have because I can take it anywhere that I go. So yeah, it has some of that in there. I mean, this here does have. Does have that.
It has those. But so this is my main version, but the first page is about the dwarven runes. And in the Hobbit. So I was just curious whether yours has that.
So this is my favorite copy of the Hobbit that I've read through once, which is the golden 50th edition anniversary.
Ooh, that's beautiful.
And it has, let's check it out. All right, because those runes are important. Boy, I don't see those runes here.
It's opposite the first page of An Unexpected Party. No?
Yeah, we got that.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, a little bit. Yep. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Cool.
Okay. All right. So, guys, chapter 1, Hobbit Unexpected Party. And as we jump into this, what's interesting about the Hobbit, as opposed to our read through of the Silmarillion that we started on 2 years ago now, was that this was created without being a part of Middle Earth originally, right? As we talked in our last episode, it was created as a story for his children, really. And it wasn't born out of the same desire for that mythology, for the wordsmithing that created the elves and the Valar and Luthien and Gondolin, right? All that sort of stuff. This is much more.
It was a fairy story, not an epic. So he wanted to tell a fairy story for children. As we learned in On Fairy Stories, he distinguishes and says fairy stories can be written for children or they can be written for adults. But and maybe if they're written for adults, they would perhaps trend more towards that epic style that you're talking about, that he was already developing from his time in the trenches and maybe a little before, but or a little after.
Yeah.
So this is definitely a children's story,
right? And what's interesting is as we go into this and we have our multiple scholarly addendums to this that we're looking at, one of the things that becomes clear is in the 1937 edition, he uses words that bring it into the modern day or make it into that fairy story mindset, into the children's story mindset, where he has things where a simile for the whistling of a steam engine, I think, or something along those lines. Or he uses the word Lilliputian, right? They were small, but not Lilliputian, which of course Lilliputian is Gulliver's Travels, and those were the little people that held down Gulliver and lived there. Or he even got rid of the word elephant in the 1966 edition, right? No more elephant, it's Oliphant now, right? Or completely excised. And so it changed, right? So the interesting thing about this book, in the same way that the Silmarillion changed over time, but this one really changed where it was outside of Middle Earth. And so if we were to come to this and say, hey, let's look at the Hobbit from where does this sit in the great cosmology of Middle Earth? Well, even Tolkien didn't start it that way. He didn't start it as like, this is the great cosmology of Middle Earth, and now here's the Hobbit within that. No, the Hobbit was actually completely separate, in the same way that Tom Bombadil originally was completely separate from Middle Earth. And so if you come at this from the whole like, man, this is amazing, this creates such depth to Middle Earth and the histories that we have. No, it really doesn't. It's really a totally different beast. Now we can look at it and say like, where were more inspiration, and where did things sort of get birthed into Middle Earth from the Hobbit? That's a different perspective. But to say how did Middle Earth completely influence the Hobbit, I don't think is the best way to approach this.
Right. We have had gardens and planted trees in most of the places we've lived in my wife and I's life. And there have been a couple instances where we've planted trees or large bushes that have then grown intertwined. And two instances, especially, where it basically made a large tree to two apple trees that sort of twined together and then made a larger one. And this is the way I look at the Hobbit. The Hobbit was a separate tree that was grown for a different purpose. It was a children's story. It was a fairy story. And then at some point along the way, he had the idea of bringing them into it, making them one tree. And it took work. He had and in some ways he actually, as we'll cover in his abortive rewrite, he tried to combine them too much, and he just gave up on it. And he said, look, But he did have to rework The Hobbit in order to bring it more in line anyway, in the 1966 version with his Lord of the Rings epics that he had written.
Yeah. So the way that I'm going to approach this is say like, where did those intertwining start to happen? Where did those things start to grow together? Particularly, even if you look at the original manuscripts, and we'll take a look at a little bit of that. It's very different, right? The names are different. It feels even like the target of where he's going with the story is a little bit different, but we can talk about that further down the road. I think the best place to start, though, as we jump into chapter 1, is the iconic line that I think you just can't get away from when you talk about the Hobbit every time, is when we talked about it last week about in a hole in the ground there lived a Hobbit, and how he wrote that down in what did he say? It was sheer joy, or it was a serendipity that this blank white sheet of paper came up in the grading of all these other term papers, whatever it was that they were. And he had an inkling to write, in a hole in the ground there lived a Hobbit. Now, Tolkien wasn't exactly known always for his memory being exactly perfect, but something like that certainly happened. And this idea, what's interesting too, is a lot of people... What's funny, as I was reading through this, a lot of people were saying like, Tolkien started this the wrong way. You never are supposed to begin a story by describing the place and the people. Like, you actually want to get into the story. And Tolkien does something completely wrong, which is describe, here's this home that this guy lives in, but we don't even know the guy, so why do we care about the home? And I find that it's so charming that he does this, and he creates a world for us, and that's his strength. When we think about how he wrote the Silmarillion and he wrote the Lord of the Rings, he creates a world, and to me that's the most important character, and that's what I love the most in the stories. He creates the character of the world, and that's what he does first. And I haven't seen people read it and go like, nah, I'm gonna stop now because he's talking about some Hobbit hole, right? Which is
right. But I like where you went there. I have come to view basically Middle Earth as its own character in Tolkien's work. He really loved Middle Earth itself. He really loved the land, and I think it's apropos that he starts the Hobbit with the Earth. Literally, in this case, the Earth, not the whole Earth, not Arda, but the Earth in which hobbits live.
Not only the Earth, but he creates a unique environment that is comfortable and still it's homey to us, right? He talks about You've got bathrooms and cellars and pantries and wardrobes and kitchens and dining rooms and wood paneling and windows. So it's weird. It's out of the ordinary. It's something totally new, but something totally comfortable. And so right away he's building up this level of, this is interesting, but this is a place where it's comfortable and it's home. And right, we get right into the whole idea of what it means to be a hobbit, more than even like at what point does he even mention the word Bilbo? It's not until the third page on here. It's a ways down. He doesn't even mention it. He says the Baggins. There was a Baggins, but he doesn't even mention who the character is. And so he creates a framework of comfort, of being very hobbity, right? And as we move forward, we start realizing there's this tension between being what a hobbit is and being what a took is. And so this whole chapter to me, and tell me if you think this is, because just so you guys know, Michael and I don't go over all our notes for the Hobbit when we read through this. We talk through it and we respond and react to each other's insights. This is the first chapter. What Tolkien does is he sets up the Tookish seed in Frodo and how it slowly goes from Gandalf being good morninged to Frodo feeling like he's missing out. To the point later in the chapter where he feels slighted by the dwarves and how they don't respect him, and I can't remember the exact words, but he comes in and he takes on the mantle of the burglar, even though he knows that that's the Tookish side in him coming out. And so
I think I really like that. I like what I see in this whole, and just to go back a little bit. So he starts with the hole in the ground, right? And then he's quick to say, okay, once he starts developing the story, but this isn't your regular hole. And he finishes that short paragraph it was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. And then what does he do? He goes through for paragraphs talking about the life of a hobbit and how hobbit holes mean comfort. And so what he puts in there, from shiny brass knobs in the middle of doors to paneled walls and carpets and tile and pantries, is fascinating to me, because and then you, I think, correctly identify the shift, which is the talk about the Tookish side and the adventure side, because essentially what The Hobbit is a story which has this tension in it, which makes it highly unusual. We think of Lord of the Rings as fantasy, right? We think of the world as a fantasy world, and that usually means like high medieval world. But if you look at the details that he's talking about, when he first, our introduction to this world as it would eventually unfold, not of course in the very beginning when he's writing it, but as it would eventually unfold, is hobbits. They are the introduction, and their world is very 18th, 19th century English. So it's not actually a fantasy world, a world that has the metallurgical abilities to create normal shiny brass knobs on the middle of doors and paneled walls and tiles and carpet and things like that. That's a more technologically advanced world than most of, especially since this isn't the castle of a king. This is a normal. So we're presented with this tension, which hobbits always represent. They represent this comfortable domesticity, love of the earth, love of the good things. Classically, of course, the hobbits represent the Englishman in the countryside. But is it the Englishman in the countryside in 13th, 14th century England? No, it is not. It is the Englishman in the countryside of 19th and 20th, early 20th, maybe 18th, late 18th, 19th, early 20th century. And so you have this world, and it's going to be very firmly a fairy story with all kinds of fairy elements, but the place it starts is essentially 19th century England in a rural town in 19th century England, but with these creatures. And so I love that tension where he's taking a thing that he loves and finds familiar and admires, and with all of the domestic virtues. And then he says, but there's this other element, the Tooks. And the Tooks represent adventure. And of course, Gandalf comes along, and in the modern business world, we would call it activates. He activates the Tookish side of Bilbo and brings about this grand adventure, which quickly leaves the Shire and most signs of domesticity behind, with the exception of a few places that they travel to. And we're spun away on this grand adventure. But I think it's important that Tolkien's world is literally grounded in a 19th century Victorian rural English village, essentially, and that's the sort of backdrop of his main character and what he starts in and what he returns to at the end, which is, I think, always an important analysis of a book: is where does a book start and where are the characters going? What's the end of the journey?
Right, and
same place.
And he sets up Bilbo's journey right there in those first couple chapters, because he's going to that Tookish side. What does it take for him to get into that, into the bull roarer Took mode, where he actually does something grand and earth shattering?
Right.
I love the line that sticks out to me the most when you're talking about, like, it's the world that was just before Tolkien grew up, right? The world of less noise and more green,
right,
is what he puts it a little bit later in the chapter. He has a pining for that, in the same way that, I mean, honestly, that I do right now. I'm like, I want to move out into the country and have be able to sit on the back porch and not hear any cars go by or any planes fly over or anything like that, and find that less noise and more green. And I think that, for me, that speaks to me a lot right now.
As a human thing, I think it speaks to us on a human level. I'm not going to claim it's 100% of humans, but most people in their life reach a point, sometimes early on, sometimes later, where that's what they look for. We look for a kind of peace, and that peace isn't to be found in the world of just glowing screens and urban life. It involves a kind of interaction with the natural world. Hobbits are so deep, and that, sorry, pun not intended, they're literally deep in that world, or at least Bilbo is, that they're out and they're surrounded by this greenery. They're a part of it, and their life is idealized in a way that is very attractive to us. That's why, to this day, New Zealand, the Shire set is one of the most visited places in New Zealand, I think, and massive tourism, because this life in the Shire, Tolkien had such a wonderful vision of happiness living in the world and with the greenery and out, in a way that's non-industrial.
Sorry, the only thing I could think of is Michael, where is your Shire? And for any of you who listen, that's all I could think about. It was in my head. Just listen to the interviews we had with the stars and the crew of the Return of the King in our 2003 roundtable interviews, and you'll know what I mean. Okay, so this is where it's interesting, right? So what Tolkien does is he sets up the Shire, the idyllic Shire, but yet that Tookishness pulls at him. He can't quite get there, and then Gandalf arrives, and it's sort of like the battle between the Shire being the one place he wants to be, and we'll get to in a little bit, but where now the guy who would bring all this adventure and problems into the Shire, well, problems in a sense, brings up that Tookishness back into Bilbo. And they do it through the word good morning. And it's got to be, like, for this to be one of the first things that he wrote, I don't know if he did originally write this, but man, what a great turn of phrase to be used repeatedly to set up who this character is. But so it immediately starts, right? There's comfort in what Bilbo's doing. He's sitting out there smoking a wooden pipe, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes. Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you had heard only a quarter of what I've heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Which is actually very different, and we'll go over this in our extended edition about the way he actually described Gandalf. But right away now, we set up.
Do you mean the early version?
The early 1937 version, where Gandalf was a short little man, and but his eyebrows still stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. But I don't think his hat was as big as what we would imagine his hat to be from Peter Jackson's films. So he comes in. They sit there. They smoke. Right, so now that's back to being comfortable, and Bilbo says good morning, and he means it. I love how Tolkien says he means it. It wasn't just like you're walking by some guy in front of your house and you just say good morning to him and then you look away right away. No. He said good morning because he's a hobbit, he's a host. He wants to, he appreciates the people around him, so he'll say good morning and he'll mean it. It is good morning. The sun was shining, the grass was green. But then maybe he has second thoughts about that, because I love how Gandalf responds with the "What do you mean?" And this here, I think this is sort of like this. The lines Bilbo has in Lord of the Rings are great when he's giving his speech at his birthday party. But this is great from the perspective of how Gandalf is now playing with him. He's like, he asks him, "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning, whether I want it or not to, or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" And it's sort of,
that feels very Chestertonian to me. That's Gandalf.
True, yeah.
Where he takes a phrase and then he plays with it and brings out widely varied meanings, sometimes paradoxical. It's great.
Yeah. The good morning that was supposed to bring even more comfort, right? Be pleasant. He meant it because it was such a fine morning. Gandalf immediately turns it and was like, "Wait a second. Are you toying with me, Bilbo? What's your real objective here in saying good morning to me?" And not only is it it's a very subtle way of including conflict here, because all of a sudden now Bilbo has to be on the defensive about the good morning, but Gandalf becomes more mysterious because he doesn't accept good morning as just the word good morning. So even the very first time you meet these characters, right, he's setting up who these characters are in just the phrase good morning. I don't know. That's how I read it, like going through it multiple times, that this good morning phrase, it is actually encompasses the creation of these characters in such a familiar and identifiable way, in that we can identify with them, but yet the mysteriousness of Gandalf is brought out, and the homeliness, the familiarity of Bilbo is borne out in the word good morning. I don't know. How do you read the whole good morning phrase, and what stuck out to you? I feel like it's the most important part of this chapter, almost.
Right. It is a very unusual way to introduce our two primary characters in the book, and it seems very English to me. It's a turn of phrase. It has, ultimately, in this conversation, it has 5 different meanings, potentially. Gandalf brings out 4 immediately. Bilbo claims that it's all at once. He means all 4 of them, but he doesn't actually. He means the second one. From what I gather of the reasoning, the second one was, it is a good morning whether I want it or not. In other words, Bilbo was making an objective statement. This is a good morning, was Bilbo. Why? How do I know that? Because the author tells me the sun, and he meant it. The sun was shining, the grass was very green. So these are objectively true things. They got nothing to do with Bilbo or Gandalf. They're just, the morning was good, and Bilbo declared it. Now, finally, Bilbo is going to end the conversation very uncomfortable, and I quote, "Quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this, he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you do use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean you want to get rid of me, and then it won't be good until I move off." So it's a word play. So we're introduced to these characters and their respective attitudes towards each other. Less about Gandalf. Gandalf's still a bit of a mystery. But we learn a lot about Bilbo and a little bit about Gandalf, all through just the wordplay. Very British, very wonderful. I love it. It's my sense of humor, but highly unusual. And also it's very British because you're supposed to say good morning. It's a courtesy thing. The British are like, even if your life is falling apart, nevertheless you say good morning. So there's a real sense that this is a very English way of approaching character introductions in my mind, and I love it.
I guess that's very philological, right? So what a philologist would do too. He would take the words and he would play them out in that way too.
Great point.
So Gandalf comes in. He's been good morninged, as we learn later. To think I've been good morninged by the son of Belladonna Took. But there's one phrase, and I want to bring this up, and this is just sort of going through what we found interesting in this here, is that I'm going to read this whole line because it's a long paragraph, but I think it shows Bilbo's struggle within himself, right? That I'm letting my Tookishness come out. It's when he learns that this is the Gandalf, right? This is after Gandalf says, "To think that I should have lived to be good morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door." And then Bilbo says, "Gandalf, Gandalf, good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales." Notice that these are now positive words. Such wonderful tales. It's not scary. They're great tales. Wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons, which we'll get back to in a minute. Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid. They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. Also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures, which is interesting because part of that phrase that seems like it doesn't hold true with who the Gandalf becomes in Lord of the Rings, but we can talk about that. Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. It's like he's speaking all these things, like the wonder of it all, right? It's bubbling up, the smoke is there, and there's some ember growing within him. And then he's like, bless me, life used to be really and then you realize, oh no, this is not interesting, is it? Wait, is it? Should I think it's interesting or not? And so he switches it. You used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. And I think that's where like the turn is just like that ember is grown within him, and it's not going to be shut off. But he's trying to turn it off at this point.
Well, part of him is trying to turn it off, and that part wins for the moment. You're right. Yeah. It's the proper Hobbit, so the Baggins versus the Took, and so the Baggins wins in this, and he's decided that he doesn't want any more of this. Although he's the Tookish part, as you mentioned, gets carried away in that paragraph or two. Gandalf continues his wordplay at that point. So Bilbo says, I beg your pardon, I had no idea you were still in business. And Gandalf says, where should I be? All the same, I'm pleased you remember my fireworks, and you're indeed for your great-grandfather Took's sake and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you've asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have? Twice now. My pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too, very likely, if you ever get over it. So this is that response where Gandalf just takes Bilbo's enthusiasm, even though Bilbo has tried to back away from his Tookish enthusiasm. He just takes it and just sweeps Bilbo up into the story of the Hobbit because of that reaction, and he does it in the most English way possible, which is with wordplay. Yeah. I'll give you what you asked for. I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have. My pardon. Twice, and I give it to you. So because he said, I beg your pardon. So this is just Gandalf playing at words the way Gandalf was playing at words with Good Morning, but he is doing it for a wider purpose, a larger purpose, and he's decided that Bilbo is his man, or Hobbit, as the case may be. Burglar, as we will find out.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Gandalf has taken the initiative. He is now in control of the situation, all because of the Tookish slip that Bill, like the fact he got so excited about seeing Gandalf. Yeah. You can imagine a different universe where Bilbo's he's like, oh yeah, Gandalf, I remember you used to cause a lot of trouble. Good day. Good morning, go away and repeat himself. And the Hobbit may have never happened. Gandalf might have left. But that paragraph where his Tookish enthusiasm takes over and Gandalf sees the spark in him. That's the one that I think whisks him out the door in a few days.
Yeah, and this is after right after he says he's going to send him on adventures. Like Bilbo's like, whoa, no adventures, no. My bag inside is taken over. Not today. Good morning. One more time. I just love how the good morning comes out in sort of intermittent phrase there.
Exactly, and all along the way, Bilbo's enemy. He's up against something. I say enemy in an air quotes way. He's up against something that the prim and proper Baggins and the safe Hobbit culture can't handle. He's up against someone that uses his polite words to whisk him into an adventure. He uses good morning. He uses I beg your pardon. And then finally, he uses Bilbo's reflexive courtesy, where Bilbo says, good morning, again. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. And with that, the Hobbit, he just turns and runs back into the Hobbit hole. So he literally invites him to tea, but you can tell it's reflexive courtesy. He doesn't even, he remembers, he's like, why did I invite him to tea? But then he quickly forgets about it. Clearly, he didn't mean to invite him to tea. He didn't want to invite him to tea, but it was reflexive courtesy. And Gandalf chuckles about it, carves into his door, and then off he goes, and the adventure is afoot.
It always bothered me, honestly, since we're ending with the carving on the door. Like that would really make me angry that the guy just carved into my door. What? Who does this? Well, obviously the wizard does this, but the first time I read that, I was like, ooh, that's kind of a thing.
As homeowners, yep, exactly. Like for us, we get, especially in Americans, we're all about our property, my property. But it is really it's really interesting because Gandalf is that kind of a figure. It is a true breach of courtesy, which even Gandalf recognizes because he spends time hammering the mark out that he carves in the door. The next day, he hides his mark that he scratches by making dents in the door, which not much of a hide. But what's interesting is Gandalf is the sort of figure who is above custom and courtesy. He is this force of adventure. He is this force from outside the Shire and doesn't care a fig for the hobbits' courtesies. In fact, he just uses them against him to accomplish his purpose. And so this is where it's becoming a fairy story. Here's a wizard, and the wizard doesn't care about your rules of politeness or what you really meant. He'll use whatever he needs to get his way, and he does.
Yeah.
And the picture behind me is wrong.
The Shire,
as was the movie.
In what sense? Where the window is?
The door.
I can't see it well enough. What's up with the door? Let me zoom in on you here.
It does not have a brass knob in the middle.
In the middle? No, it doesn't. I think the movies did. I think the movies
they didn't have it. I don't think they had it in the middle. I think they had it on the side. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they did. Anyway.
Okay. So we're going to end it here. However, there are a few interesting things that I think we need to bring up. And one of them is the unexpected luck of Widow's Sons, where Bilbo says this. Gandalf is not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of Widow's Sons. And I had that when I read that. I had that marked up. I'm like, what is he talking about? The unexpected.
Why are we just looking at me?
Oh, because you're so important, Michael. Bam! I'm looking at you. There you go. Sorry. All right, we're back. So what is up with the unexpected luck of Widow's Sons? And what we had a
self-referential there a little bit.
Maybe. Actually, here's the thing: we had a comment from PW Miles 56 on our last episode on YouTube, and this is what he wrote. And thanks, he did the research tonight, so we didn't have to. But this is awesome. A while ago, he says, I asked myself where specifically Tolkien might have read a story about the unexpected luck of Widow's Sons, a phrase Bilbo used in the first conversation with Gandalf. The answer turned out to be The Red Etin, a story in the Blue Fairy Book, the first of Andrew Lang's colored fairy books, which, if you listen to us talking on fairy stories, that's what Tolkien references a couple of times. There are, in fact, 3 Widow's Sons in the story, together with some other parallels: a knife which changes color, a helpful raven, a riddle game which the evil Etin knows it is bound by. It also has 3 heads. The rescue of a princess. Thematically, the hero wins through because, like Bilbo, he is at once generous, brave, and prudent, thus prefiguring the theme of providence, favoring those who deserve it. Yeah. So ultimately, it's not necessarily that this was a specific inspiration for the whole story, but clearly Tolkien knew about it and said the unexpected luck of Widow's Sons because he was speaking as a fairy story. What you mentioned earlier, that this is what it is. So why not talk about, in a sense, other fairy stories? That's why he, in the original one, he brought up Lilliputians.
That's right.
Yeah. So. Yep. If you've ever wondered why,
it seems he left this in, but he took out Lilliputians. Lilliputians is a little too specific, probably. So he did. Whereas this one's, probably general enough.
He took out Lilliputians. He took out elephant. The steam engine. So where's the steam engines? The steam engines is, I'm finding it really fast because I have my copy of the annotated Hobbit here, and then he also got rid of, since we're looking at it. he said he used to say tomatoes and pickles, but since tomatoes were from the New World,
yep,
he changed it to cold. I think it was let me find it here. Cold chicken and pickles. Cold chicken and pickles. Oh, it was cold chicken and tomatoes, and he changed it to cold chicken and pickles. This is further on the story, but those are the things that he got rid of to bring it more into a English Isles centric story. So it didn't have elephant, it didn't have tomatoes, it didn't have steam engines at the time,
but it still has clocks and doorbells
and brass. Yeah.
Again, this is we're leaving. In a way, it's a bit like Tolkien would slap me, I'm sure, if he was around, but it's a bit like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where they leave the comfortable English Tudor home to enter a world of fantasy. In Tolkien, in The Hobbit, the case of The Hobbit, the fantasy world comes to the comfortable underground English Tudor home with all of its. You can't imagine clocks. I guess dwarves could make clocks, probably, but what we don't see is references to that level of technology throughout the rest of the Lord of the Rings, and rarely in the Hobbit. So there is a disconnect, which has become so familiar to me that I have to notice it. But there is a disconnect between the world of the Shire and what it has. Even the interior design of their homes is just way above medieval level stuff, and it's just 19th century English stuff is what it is, and maybe 18th, late 18th, but yeah, it's
this is where, in case you haven't heard, we're going to be looking at the aborted rewrite of the Hobbit that Tolkien began in 1960, only got like 3.5 chapters in, I think it was, and see how he changed it, because it does lose that wondrous fairy tale aspect of it by becoming more grounded in Middle Earth. And so even I think in the 1937 edition, when here he talks about how it was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. Well, originally in the 1937 edition, Tolkien wrote, it had always been said that long ago one or other of the Tooks had married into a fairy family. The less friendly said a goblin family. And so he's pulling back a little bit from that. Because he adds in the new edition, the 1966 edition, the final edition that we're reading right now, that was of course absurd, but certainly there was blah blah blah. So he added that was of course absurd, whereas in the original edition that was not absurd because it was a fairy story. So maybe the Tooks did marry into a fairy family, and the fairy was not necessarily the elves of Middle Earth at this point in time. It was something completely different, and that brings us all the way back to, you can't read The Hobbit as sort of a history book of Middle Earth, because it wasn't meant to be that, in the same way that The Lord of the Rings is a history of what happened in the War of the Ring. The Hobbit is completely different, in the same way that I said Tom Bombadil is completely different. You can't read that into it. But I love seeing all these differences, because I think it makes me still wonder, and something we brought up in the last episode, does Tolkien regret at all the changes that he made to does he regret it all not being able to change The Hobbit as much as he wanted to, or does he wish he would have originally had it more in the world of Middle Earth? But then again, it never would have been published if that would have been that way.
Correct. And I don't know what Tolkien thought. I know what I would have thought in his place, so we can say that. I could say that, which is based on what he says on fairy stories. He believes that it's appropriate and good to have fairy stories for children and fairy stories for adults. And I think that there was some convenience or desire in him. He would probably describe it as an unfolding of the story. That's the way the story unfolded, that all of a sudden he likes using that word, he discovered that The Hobbit was connected to Lord of the Rings. And so then he had the job of melding them, because of course there were incongruities to be had between the two. And he never really fully melded them. They still remain. But I think that there's a sense that the world of the Shire was always this wonderful place to retreat to in Middle Earth. which is utterly different from the beauty of a place like even other good places like Rivendell and Lothlorien and Minas Tirith and such. Their other havens, and it just has this character which is childlike, and I think that is not something he regrets, because he leans so heavily he far be it from transitioning away from hobbits in the Lord of the Rings. He gives us 4 of them as main characters instead of 1. So he really leans into the Hobbit side of things, and I think that that for him it was an inextricable part of the story. He just wasn't quite sure how to make it fit in some cases, and ultimately abandoned his effort to make it to completely change it. That's what I find fascinating. The Hobbit, the Shire retains the Hobbit's childlike nature, and he had at one point had a thought to shift it completely over into the very adult fairy story of Lord of the Rings and give it that character more of it anyway, and he abandoned that. So
I'm gonna bring this around a little bit. I think, well, when they say write what you know, and what did Tolkien say? I'm a hobbit and everything but size. So he knew what it was like to be a hobbit. And so if he's going to write a story set in the world of Middle Earth, like a story that is a prose story, and not an attempt at some great, like the Lay of Lathian of Luthien and Beren and everything, he would write a story that he felt like he could be a part of, because that makes it a whole lot easier, right? What you know. In the same way, not in the same way, but I read the book Tolkien and the Great War, which is all about the time period, really from 1910 to 1917? Is that when the World War I ended? And about how
1918.
1918. Okay, so about how his group of friends, the TCBS as they call it. Oh, I can't remember what that stands for exactly. Something Bohemian Society. Anyway, the two of them died in the war. 2 or 3 of them died, but their goal was to write great, noticeable things and improve the literary culture of England, right? That was what they wanted to do. And so when Tolkien wrote the Silmarillion, right, when he wrote these early tales, the Book of Lost Tales, and he sent them to his friends, like they were like, this is amazing, this is something you need to look into, and he wrote some of the poetry with it. But that's the sort of stuff, that kind of raises the level, I guess you could say, right? There's a scholarliness to it. But with The Hobbit, the accessibility of that, because it was something we can identify with, is a completely different beast. But I don't think he would have ever gotten to The Hobbit without studying all the sort of stuff that he studied, because he felt like he had to write something greater for the literary culture, for the culture of England.
I love that. I love that reconnection. And I would add to that by saying there's something to be said for when you're wanting to create a secondary world, to make it believable. Tolkien no doubt knew that you have to, the most believable you can make it is all cultures have languages and words of their own. So he was set about inventing that. It is a human thing. All cultures have poetry and song. This is a part of human existence, and Tolkien was very fond of that. They have history and wars and great movements of people. So Tolkien was writing about all that. What I love about The Hobbit is The Hobbit takes the domestic, the small, the close, the things that we love that are around us, and brings that into the world and makes the world real and livable and attractive at the micro level, not just the macro level of the history and the wars and the poetry and the great deeds and the song and the languages. He has all that, even alphabets and such. But he then also takes care to bring to us the domestic, the small, the personal, the comfortable, and that I think does its own work, its own heavy lifting in carving a place in our hearts for Middle Earth.
Yeah. These are the first etchings of it in our hearts, right? You wouldn't come to the Valaquenta and be like, I love this. It's really hard to get into unless you know where it's kind of going.
That's right.
Okay, all right, guys, we're gonna shut it down there, except for 2 things. One, you can become a member of thewondering.com. or exploringtolkien.com. We're trying to decide. Maybe we'll switch it up. You can become a member at thewondering.com/member. We're going to talk a little bit more about a couple notes in here, including what essentially Tolkien says about pointy ears, or has about pointy ears for hobbits, because a lot of people kind of said like, oh, Tolkien never said he had pointy ears. Well, maybe he kind of did. We're gonna take a look at it in this is the annotated Hobbit. Got a couple of notes from Mandy and Billiam here that we're going to take a look at too, and including a couple other things here in the annotated Hobbit and the history of the Hobbit that I think are a little deeper looks into what we can learn from how Tolkien got to where he was with the Hobbit. All right, so but first, something we haven't done in a little while is
If You Like Tolkien.
So, I have a lot of copies of the Hobbit. There's this one, the new one, the annotated Hobbit, which we'll link below. Right? Okay. So there's this one here I showed earlier, my golden 50th anniversary edition of the Hobbit.
That's beautiful.
This would be 1987, I think. Right? Wouldn't that be 50, or is it 50 on his on the anniversary of his death? Because I didn't get this in 1987. I need to find out actually. Now that I look at it, but it is beautiful.
You got it last year. The 50th anniversary of his death was last year. Did you get it last year?
Oh, maybe it was the anniversary 1966.
Okay.
Of the publishing here. Yeah.
That would make more sense.
2016.
2016.
Yeah. So that was probably that. Okay. So I've got that edition. I'm going to show you. This is coming up to the nadir of all the copies of the Hobbit. So I've got this still enclosed. This is what is this? A limited edition collector's box for The Hobbit that came out probably in 2003. I never opened this up, but they published it then. There's this copy of The Hobbit. It's the comic book version of The Hobbit that came out like 20 years ago. Yeah, I never really read it actually, but I got like 10 copies of it. There's this copy of The Hobbit. Man, this is Alan Lee's illustrated version.
I actually like that one. I have that one.
Yeah, this one is really nice. I really enjoy this one. There is this copy of The Hobbit with illustrated by John McCatlin, which is kind of cool. It's kind of different. The binding is really unique on this one, and actually it's got some nice drawings in there too. It's for reading with the kids. I did this with the kids, and they really enjoyed it because it has just a little bit more flavor to it. All right, we're getting pretty high in the stack here, but I'm not done yet because there's even more to like.
Holy mackerel!
All right, so I've got this is actually might be my favorite cover of The Hobbit, just because the world drawing. This is Alan Lee. Yeah, Alan Lee.
Looks like Alan Lee, yeah.
Or yeah, and this was my. Okay, guys, sorry, I don't remember. In any case, it's one of the big two. I'm gonna actually add Ted Nassum to the big three. However, I really love this. Is a trade paperback version. Came out around the turn of the century. These are I have all the different covers of that. I just feel this is really classy, right? Doesn't that look really nice? It's just very classy.
That's a nice skin. A good cover can really make an addition. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, right. Okay. So this is not the greatest cover, but it's not too bad. It's just this is sort of the Robert Jordan when that was coming out. This is what they did, right? Put J.R. Tolkien in sort of like a papyrus font and we'll make it work. All right. So then here, the greatest cover ever of The Hobbit. And I've mentioned it before.
Oh, shame. Sorry.
This is the 1987 edition, but so I found this on eBay for like $3 and I'm like, I have to have it. I don't have this copy, but I think this was the copy that my parents might have had or might have bought me, and I don't have it anymore, or maybe it's in
I don't even want to know who the illustrator is because then I would hate them, and I don't want to.
It's not an illustration. It's a picture, dude. It's actually a picture. It's a guy in a Gollum suit with a fat Frodo and fat
really?
Bilbo
It's a photo?
Yeah, it's sort of weird photo. It's like rotoscope photo kind of, like whatever that. It's pretty bad. I should see if I can find what the cover is.
I have an even older version downstairs, which is the one with just looks like it has the Shire, the picture of Bag End, the painting of Bag End.
The Bilbo, like Tolkien's
it's a
painting?
paperback. Yeah, it's a paperback.
Yeah, I need to get like the 1960s version too. I don't have that.
Yeah, that was from the 70s or 60s edition.
But yeah, that makes a lot of copies of The Hobbit that I've got now. I just added the annotated Hobbit.
All right, man, you win. You win on that one. That's for sure.
I will say because of the website and now doing the podcast, they do. Well, I haven't gotten any for the podcast, but they would send me all the editions back in the day especially when the movies were coming out, because we'd review them and show them. So nice. I still have those copies of it. Anyway, all right. So if you like Tolkien, there's some awesome copies. They're like, dude, just go on eBay. you can find some great versions of the Hobbit. Like this annotated copy of the Hobbit, it was from some Goodwill store in like Montana or something like that. It is in great pristine condition. It was $9. So it's a
nice.
But if you want to support us, you can buy it on Amazon because we put it. It's all affiliate link. But I'm just saying you can get it for cheaper on on eBay if you want to. Oh, it's so heavy. Sorry, I'm so far away. Okay, there. Okay, so heavy. All right.
And he's there
back. You go. Let's jump into our extended edition, guys. Go to themorning.com/member to become a member to hear it because it's so awesome. And we're going to tell you about the very special thing that happened during the middle of this episode. I don't know if you caught it, but boy, howdy, that was kind of fun. We're gonna let all of our supporters in on on the unexpected.
It was super fun, but if you're a freeloader, you'll never know. Bye-bye.
You'll never know, freeloaders.